Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you, and this is how to draft MTG. Today we're looking at my Bloomburrow draft guide. The new set drops on Arena this Tuesday. Pre-releases are already underway. I'm going to show you my approach to drafting the format, some tips to help you crush your pre-release in your first few drafts of Bloomburrow. As always, please click like, leave a comment, and subscribe if you want to help support the channel. It is the best way to help. It's totally free, and we're approaching 1,500 subs on the channel, which is really special to me. I really appreciate all the support. Thank you so much. Let's get right into it. We'll start with our pick order. When you open your pack of Bloomburrow, the first thing you're going to be doing is looking at the rare. I won't list all of the rares in the set, but I will go over some of the best ones here. What you're looking for in general is a single color card that's not too expensive, that has a high power level, big effect on the game. This is going to be cards like Starfall Invocation, Season of Loss, and Dragonhawk Fate's Tempest. Past those, we're going to be looking for our Bs, our top uncommons and commons. These are single colored cards for the most part. They're very powerful, not too hard to cast, not too expensive, and most importantly, they have to fit into multiple decks. They got to be really flexible. We're looking to take cards like these in our first and second picks, and hopefully beyond if we get really lucky. Starting with white, we've got Hop to It. This is 2 and a white for a sorcery. Create 3 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens, creating 3 bodies in 1 card. It's extremely valuable, and it even has synergy with some of the better archetypes in the format. We also have Bright Blade Stoat, 1 and a white for a 2/2 that has First Strike and Lifelink. Just a lot to like about this. Really good rate, and First Strike and Lifelink are 2 of the better keywords you can have on a creature in general. We also have Shrike Force, 2 and a white for a 1/3 with Flying, Double Strike, and Vigilance. Another group of keywords that are all quite excellent. This one gets even better if you're able to put a +1/+1 counter on it or some kind of equipment or use a combat trick with it. Next we have Drift Gloom Coyote, 3 white for a 3/4. When it enters, you exile target creature an opponent controls until Drift Gloom Coyote leaves the battlefield. If that creature had power 2 or less, it gets a +1/+1 counter as well. So this will be really good at taking care of tokens, of which there are many in this set, and if you take a token with this, it's gone forever. And if you take a big creature with it, well, you needed to kill a big creature, and that's really good too. At common, we've got Banishing Light. This is 2 and a white for an enchantment. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. So just a way to deal with any problematic creature or permanent that your opponent's got for just 3 mana and at common. And finally, we have Intrepid Rabbit, 2 and a white for a 3/2 rabbit with Offspring 1, which means we can pay an additional 1 as we cast this spell. If we do, when it enters, we get a 1/1 token that's a copy of it. So for 4 mana, we'll be getting a 3/2 and a 1/1. And they'll both say, when this creature enters, target creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So just a ton of rate here for 3 mana or for 4 mana, and targeting your creatures matters in this set as well, as we're going to see. So really good one here for white. In blue, we've got Plume Creed Escort. This is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 bird with flash and flying. Great stat line there. And when it enters, target creature you control gains hexproof until end of turn. So you can save a creature from a removal spell, which is really valuable. We also have Night Fisher, 3 blue for a 4/5 bird with flying. And whenever another non-token bird you control enters, create a 1/1 blue fish creature token. So really good rate here, 5 mana, 4/5 flying. That's going to produce some extra bodies for you as well. We've also got Sugarcoat, 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura with flash. It turns a creature into a food, which is an artifact that has 2 tap and sacrifice it to gain 3 life. Finally, in blue, we've got Splash Lasher. This is 3 and a blue for a 3/3 with Offspring of 1 and a blue. When this creature enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put a stun counter on it. In black, we've got Fell, sorcery for 1 and a black. It says destroy target creature. Nice and efficient. We've got Downwind Ambusher. This is 3 and a black for a 4/2 with flash, and when it enters, you can choose one. Either target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn, or destroy target creature an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. So this will make it easy for you to win a combat. If their 3/3 blocks your 3/3, flash this in. Now your creature lives, theirs dies, and you get a 4/2. Or you can finish off a big 6/6 that they have that you attacked into with your 1/1. So lots of value here. Feed the Cycle is next. This is 1 and a black for an instant. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, forage or pay a black. To forage, exile 3 cards from your graveyard or sacrifice a food. And the effect is destroy target creature or planeswalker. So nice instant speed, deals with most problematic things, and sometimes it's cheaper. Love it. Consumed by Greed. This is 1 black for an instant. It says gift a card. Gift is a theme in this set. It says you may promise an opponent a gift as you cast this spell. If you do, they draw a card before its other effects. And Consumed by Greed says target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. Really nice. If the gift was promised, if you give them an extra card, you return target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So you'll get to decide if you have something really good in your graveyard, you don't mind them drawing an extra card if you get to get that thing back, and you always get to kill their best thing for 3 mana at instant speed. Great card. Savor at common is next. 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and you create a food token. Lots of value here. -2/-2 can be better than dealing 2 damage a lot of the time because it can win a combat. You know, 2 4/4s are tangling and you play this, then your creature gets to beat theirs. And getting the food is a nice added bonus. And at common, we also have Nocturnal Hunger. 2 and a black for an instant. Gift a food. Destroy target creature. If the gift wasn't promised, you lose 2 life. So in your aggressive decks, you won't want to give the gift because you'll be ahead and you'll be trying to kill them. And if in your control decks, you can give them a food. You don't mind them gaining 3 life as long as you're killing their best stuff and staying alive. And I almost forgot to mention one of the best cards in the set at Uncommon, Thoughtstalker Warlock. 2 and a black for a 2/2 with Menace. When it enters, choose target opponent. They discard a card. If they lost life this turn, you get to choose which card they discard. Really, really excellent card. In red, we've got Brazen Collector. 1 and a red for a 2/1 with first strike. Whenever it attacks, you add a red mana, and you don't lose that mana until the end of your turn. Pushes damage, and it ramps you into your bigger stuff. What more could you ask for? Quaketusk Boar is next. 3 red for a 5/5 with reach, trample, and haste. Just a ton of stats, and it's going to come out of nowhere and deal a lot of damage to your opponent. Rabid Gnaw is next. 1 and a red for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So a removal spell that pushes extra damage and targets a creature, which, as I said before, is going to matter a lot in this set. Blooming Blast is 1 and a red for an instant. It says gift a treasure. It deals 2 damage to target creature, and if the gift was promised, it also deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. So we've got a 2 mana deal 2, which is nothing special, but I think the ability for this to just end the game out of nowhere, especially if you've got a couple of them in your deck, makes it into the B range for me. You're not going to obviously want to give them the treasure all the time, but when you do, it'll be because you're about to win the game. Flame Cash Gecko, 1 and a red for a 2/2. When it enters, if an opponent lost life this turn, you add a black and a red mana. And you can pay 1 and a red and discard a card to draw a card. So this will just get you way ahead in the game early on, and later in the game help filter your draws. It's really nice for a 2-drop. Teapot Slinger, 3 and a red for a 3/4 with Menace. And whenever you expend 4, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. You expend 4 as you spend your 4th total mana to cast spells during a turn. So you're going to want to spend mana and cast spells anyways. Might as well be dealing extra damage to them on a nice 4 mana, 3/4 Menace body. Love this card. And finally, at common for red, we've got Take Out the Trash. 1 and a red for an instant, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and if you control a raccoon, you may discard a card and draw a card. Just a lot of rate here, and this will be a high pick for almost any deck that's playing red. In green, we've got Hunter's Talent, one of the best uncommons in the set here. 1 and a green for an enchantment. It's a class enchantment. When it enters, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. So nice, efficient removal spell. And then later on, you can pay 1 and a green to level it up. And then once you've leveled it up, it'll say, whenever you attack, target attacking creature gets +1/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. And then you could pay 3 and a green to level it up again. And you'll get this added bonus at the beginning of your end step. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. So efficient removal spell that stays relevant through the game and provides a lot of value for you. This is an excellent card. We also have Galewind Moose, 4 green for a 6/6 with Flash, Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. You're going to get to flash this in, eat an attacker of your opponents, and then beat them down with this giant moose. Sounds pretty fun to me. Hivespine Wolverine is 3 green for a 5/4. When it enters, we choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, or it fights target creature token, or destroy target artifact or enchantment. A lot of flexibility here, a lot of rate, and at its floor, it's a 5 mana 6/5, which is pretty darn good. We've also got Brambleguard Veteran, 1 green for a 3/4. When you expend 4, raccoons you control get +1/+1 and gain vigilance until end of turn. So just by itself, it's probably attacking as a 4/5 on the next turn, and maybe it's doing even more than that. Just a really good rate. We also have Clifftop Lookout, 2 and a green for a 1/2 with reach. When it enters, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a land. Put that onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So again, just a nice rate here, 3 mana 1/2 that finds you a land, and if you can reuse it, which we'll see some ways to do that, then it's even better. Finally, at common, we've got Baker's Bane Duo, 1 and a green for a 2/2. When it enters, you get a food token, and whenever you expend 4, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Again, so really good rate here. Food is important in this set, and it stays relevant in the later turns, attacking as a 3/3. Love this card. Finally, for our colorless cards, we've got Uncharted Haven. It's a land. It enters tapped. As it enters, choose a color, and it taps for 1 mana of the chosen color. So if there's nothing exciting in the pack, nothing that fits your deck, you're happy to just take this, and it'll help make your mana better. So reviewing the pick order, we started with the A's, the bomb rares, followed by the B's, the top uncommons and commons. These are cards we're hoping to first pick, second pick, third pick. Following those, we're looking for our Signpost Uncommons and Build-Arounds. These are the cards that push us into a color pair archetype, which we're going to go over next. So we're hoping to pick these around pick 3, pick 4, pick 5, and then after that we're looking for C's. These are support cards that fit into the archetype that we think we are drafting. Let's take a quick look at the best of the Signpost Uncommons, in my opinion. These are sort of the B-level Signpost Uncommons. We've got Vine Reap Mentor in black-green, Seaglaive Mentor in red-white, Starseer Mentor in white-black, and Wandertail Mentor in red-green. Now we'll take a look at each archetype and go over the Signpost cards along with the key build-arounds and support cards and the strategy of the archetype. Each archetype in the set has a creature type that it wants you to build around and a theme. So in this case, white-blue's creature type is birds, and the theme, the strategy of the archetype is flying creatures helping non-flying creatures. Each archetype has a Signpost Uncommon, a Signpost Common, and I'm also going to shout out a rare for each archetype as well, as I think these rares are going to pull you into these archetypes and also be nice rewards if you're the only one drafting the archetype at the table. You should see these coming around. So I'll start with the uncommon here. This is Plume Creed Mentor. This is 1 white-blue for a 2/3 bird scout with flying. It says whenever it or another creature you control with flying enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control without flying. So again, we want to pair creatures with flying with creatures without flying to get the full benefit of this card. At common, we have Seedpod Squire. This is 3 and a white-blue hybrid for a 3/3 bird with flying. Whenever it attacks, target creature you control without flying gets +1/+1 until end of turns. Similar theme here. Castrol the Wind-Crested is the rare. This is 3 white-blue for a 4/5 bird with flying. Whenever one or more birds you control deal combat damage to a player, you choose 1. You may put a bird creature card from your hand or graveyard onto the battle with a finality counter on it, meaning if it leaves the battlefield, it's gone forever. Or you can put a +1/+1 counter on each bird you control, or you can draw a card. So just a handful of excellent abilities there and a great stat line to start with. So obviously we want a lot of birds and we want a lot of creatures with flying. Plume-Creed Escort that we talked about earlier is going to be excellent in this deck. And then a couple of less important, maybe more C-level cards here. Finch Formations, 3 mana, 2/2 flying with Offspring 3, and it gives a creature flying when it comes in. Pileated Provisioner, 5 mana, 3/4 flying. Enters, puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature without flying. Just nice support cards that fit the theme. In terms of non-flying creatures that we're looking to include, creatures with the Valiant ability are really nice here because when they become a target of a spell or ability for the first time in a turn, they get a bonus. And Plume-Creed Mentor and the like target when they put their +1/+1 counter on or whatever else their effect is. So stuff like Nettle Guard, 1 and a white 3/1. When it becomes targeted for the first time in a turn, it gets +0/+2. And it can sacrifice to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Mouse Trapper, 2 and a white for a 3/2 with flash. When it becomes targeted for the first time, tap a creature an opponent controls. And Veteran Guard Mouse, 3 and a red-white hybrid for a 3/4. When it becomes targeted for the first time each turn, it gets +1/+0 and gains first strike, and you scry 1. So these are really, really nice cards to have alongside these flying bird creatures. Other creatures that love getting +1/+1 counters and getting pumped up are cards like Brightblade Stoat, which we talked about earlier, 2 mana, 2/2 first strike lifelink. Shoreline Looter, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 that can't be blocked and lets you draw and discard when it hits the opponent. And Waterspout Warden, 2 and a blue for a 3/2. When it attacks, if another creature entered the battlefield under your control this turn, it gains flying. So your flying creatures can give bonuses to it, and then it gains flying when you go to combat. Really nice little combo there. A couple of other cards that work really well in this deck. Dazzling Denial, 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, but if you have a bird, they have to pay 4 instead. So not a premium card for a non-bird deck, but if you're in birds, you should see these late in the draft and be happy to pick them up. Night Fisher, the B-level card we talked about earlier, 5 mana, 4/5 flying. When other birds come in, you get fish tokens. It's a really good card, but at its best in this archetype. I'll also give my general thoughts as we close up each archetype. So for blue-white birds, I think this is not a top-tier deck, but I think it's definitely pretty solid. Pros for this deck are that Flyers decks just tend to be good in general in Limited. Putting a bunch of creatures with flying in your deck is a good strategy to begin with, so I think this will be pretty solid. In terms of cons, the theme isn't super well supported, and there's the possibility of drawing only your flyers or only your non-flyers, the wrong thing at the wrong time. Could be a little bit clunky, so look out for that. Next archetype is White-Black Bats. Their theme is life total change on your turn. So gaining or losing life on your turn. The Signpost Uncommon is Starseer Mentor, 3 white-black for a 3/5 bat with flying and vigilance. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, target opponent loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. So great stat line here, and this ability is really going to add up turn after turn. Your opponent's going to have some tough decisions to make. In terms of enabling this, we got Moonrise Cleric at common, 1 white-black hybrid for a 2/3 bat with flying. Whenever it attacks, you gain 1 life. So this will enable your life change stuff every turn, pressure your opponent with damage, and keep your life total nice and padded. We have 2 rares for this archetype. The first is Zoraline Cosmos Collar, 1 white-black for a 3/3 bat with flying and vigilance. Whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain 1 life. And whenever it enters or attacks, you may pay white-black and 2 life. When you do, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So in a deck with a ton of bats, this is going to gain us a ton of life, trigger all of our life change stuff, and even get our creatures back from the dead for us. A lot of value here. This is an excellent card and an early pick for sure. Lunar Convocation is the other rare. This one I'm not as jazzed about. This is white-black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained life this turn, each opponent loses 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, if you gained and lost life this turn, you create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. You can also pay 1 and a black and 2 life to draw a card. So a lot going on here, but kind of not a lot going on here unless you're really in on the white-black deck. I think this is a card you're looking to pick up way later in the draft and not super early, as it's not really worth it to pay 2 and 2 life just to draw a card, and you also need to have something going on for the life gain to get the token. It's just a little bit finicky, a little bit fussy of a card, so pick it up later. So build arounds for this deck. Star Charter is 3 and a white for a 3/1 flying bat. The beginning of your end step, if you gained or lost life this turn, look at the top 4 cards of your library and you may reveal a creature with power 3 or less, put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom. Really nice way to just draw extra cards. And Moonstone Harbinger is 2 and a black for a 1/3 bat with flying and death touch. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, bats you control get +1/+0 and gain death touch until end of turn, and it triggers only once each turn. So pumping up your team's really nice, and the death touch actually is probably going to be pretty nice. There's a lot of creatures with reach in this set, so being able to get your 1 and 2 power bats through the 4, 5, 6 toughness reach creatures in the set is going to be actually big game, I think. And finally, we've got Sinister Monolith, 3 and a black for an artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can tap it, pay 2 life, and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards as a sorcery. So this is going to make sure that your life change cards are triggered every single turn. I'm not 100% sure how good this is. These first 2 cards I would pick sort of like a B-ish territory. The Monolith I'd be looking to pick up a little bit later on in the draft, but we'll see how good it turns out to be in the format. Some support cards here, just looking for a bunch of bats to play. We got Starlit Soothsayer, 2 and a black for a 2/2 flying, lets you surveil. Starscape Cleric, 1 and a black for a 2/1 bat with flying, it can't block. It's got Offspring for 2 and a black. And whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. And Glide Dive Duo, 4 and a black for a 3/3 bat with flying. When it enters, you drain them for 2. More support cards, Life Creed Duo, 1 and a white for a 1/2 bat with flying. Whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life. Waxwane Witness, 3 and a white for a 2/4 bat with flying and vigilance. Whenever you gain or lose life during your turn, it gets +1/+0. So just lots of little cards that sort of work with the theme here. I really like to see that. And then a big payoff in the draft is going to be Sonar Strike. This is 1 and a white for an instant, deals 4 damage to target attacking, blocking, or tapped creature, and you gain 3 life if you control a bat. So this is the card that no other deck should want, but your deck, the bat deck, will really benefit from picking these up late in the draft. Some other ways to change life totals. Not the best ways, but some ways to change your life total during your turn. Stargaze and Dire Sight. These are both cards that let you draw extra cards and lose life. So this deck will probably use them the best since it has a lot of life gain sort of inherently. So be on the lookout for these, but they're not early picks. And the final way to change your life total is by sacrificing food. So anything that makes a food is potentially valuable here. Savor, probably the best of the bunch. This is the 2 mana, -2/-2, make a food. Excellent in this deck. So white-black bats, I think, is going to be one of the better archetypes in the format. In terms of pros, it's got a lot of support for the theme, as we saw. And flyers plus life gain is just a good strategy. It goes really well together. You're attacking your opponent and you're gaining life. So when they attack you back, you're not falling too far behind. It's got a good suite of removal. Black's got a lot of good removal spells, and white's got a couple of really good ones as well. In terms of cons, this deck does not block well, as we've seen. It needs to be on offense, so if you're not curving out, if you're not getting ahead of your opponent, you might have a little bit of trouble with white-black bats. Next is Whit-Red Mice. The theme is Valiant, which, as we saw, is targeting your creatures for the first time each turn. They get a bonus. Our uncommon is Seedglaive Mentor, 1 red-white for a 3/2 with vigilance and haste. It's a mouse. And it has Valiant. When it becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So just nice stats, nice abilities, good types, and you want to be targeting this thing every turn that you can. The common is Veteran Guard Mouse, 3 and a red-white hybrid for a 3/4 mouse with Valiant. It gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, and you scry 1. So just a really nice package there for just 4 mana. And the rare, Really nice one here. Mabel, heir to Cragflame. 1 red, white for a 3/3 mouse. Gives other mice you control +1/+1. When it enters, you create Cragflame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token. With equipped creature gets +1/+1, vigilance, trample, and haste, and that sword costs 2 to equip. So the nice thing about equipment is when you equip, it targets, which means it's going to turn on all the Valiant stuff, and the equipment itself is really quite nice. There's a lot of good keywords there. And this is all for 3 mana, so love to see this. Mabel's going to be a high pick. Draft it, put it in your deck, enjoy it. So we're going to be looking for creatures with Valiant abilities to put in this deck. Some of the better ones here: Flowerfoot, Swordmaster, single white for a 1/2 with Offspring 2. It has Valiant. When it becomes a target for the first time each turn, mice you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So a really nice way to pump your team, makes multiple bodies, right on theme, good types. This is a B, maybe even a B+ if you're building around it well. Mouse Trapper is 2 and a white for a 3/2 with Flash, has Valiant. When it becomes a target for the first time each turn, tap target creature and opponent controls. So get those blockers out of the way. This is a very aggressive deck. These 2 cards are very high picks for the deck. More of a C-level card here in Whisker Quill Scribe, 1 and a red for a 2/2 mouse. When it becomes targeted for the first time each turn, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. It's a nice 2/2 with upside. You're going to need it for your curve. Heartfire Hero, single red for a 1/1. Valiant, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So just a nice little start to your curve that's going to grow throughout the game, and it's a mouse, which is really good. Nettle Guard, we already looked at, 1 and a white for 3/1. Valiant gives it +0/+2, and you can pay 1 and sack it to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Just nice 2-drop, a little bit of utility, love to see it. Some ways to enable Valiant. We're going to be looking for ways to enable Valiant every turn, because we're not going to have a lot of room for too many combat tricks in this deck. We want cards that can do it multiple times. One of the best ways to do that is with equipment. We have Short Bows, 2 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance and reach. So nice package there for just 2 mana and an equip cost of 1. And so keep in mind that if you've got 3 or 4 mana available and you don't have anything else to do, you can move this from creature to creature and trigger all of their Valiant abilities one by one. So a really nice piece for this deck. We also have Bravekin Duo, single white for a 1/1. You can pay 1 and tap it to give target creature +1/+1 until end of turn as a sorcery, and it is also a mouse. Thistledown Players is 2 and a white for a 3/3 mouse. When it attacks, untap target non-land permanent. This is a really nice one because it doesn't cost any mana. All you gotta do is attack with it and you get to target one of your creatures. Could be an untapped creature even. Doesn't have to be attacking, nothing like that. You're just gonna get that targeting ability every turn from Thistledown Players. Another card that's just kind of in the C range, but fits really well in this deck. Brambleguard Captain is 3 and a red for a 2/3 mouse. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gets +X/+0, where X is its power. So again, just every turn, triggering Valiant, pushing extra damage, love to see it. Harvest Right Host is 2 and a white for a 3/3 rabbit. When it or another rabbit you control enters, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn, and you draw a card if it's the second time the ability has resolved this turn. So this one wants you to actually play some rabbits, or you may want to even play some creatures with Changeling that have multiple creature types, all creature types in fact. So this one does require some work on the deck building side and may not always fit, but I think when it does fit, it's going to be really, really good in this deck. Raccoon Rallier is 1 and a red for a 2/2, can tap, give something haste at sorcery speeds. Just another way to repeatedly target Valiant for no mana. Love it. And then, of course, the one-shot ways, the combat trick ways to trigger Valiant. We got Mabel's Metal, 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gets +2/+2, and another creature gets +1/+1. So you get to hit 2 creatures. Awesome. Intrepid Rabbit, we already saw, is 2 and a white for a 3/2 with Offspring 1. When it enters, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Feather of Flight, 1 and a white for an aura with flash, enchant creature. When it enters, draw a card, enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and flying. Really nice effect here. The card draw is really nice, and you get to target your creature. Crumb and Get It is single white for +2/+2. Combat Trick, sometimes you gift a food, sometimes you don't. Might of the Meek, single red for an instant. Target creature gains trample. If it's a mouse, it gets +1/+0, and you draw a card. So just another trick that replaces itself, gives you a Valiant trigger. And Rabid Gnaw, the premium red removal spell, 1 and a red, target creature gets +1/+0, and then deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. The fact that this targets makes it even better in red-white. Love to see it. So my thoughts on red-white, I think it's one of the very best decks in the format. It's a heavily supported theme, and aggressive creatures plus tricks is always a good formula. In terms of cons, the red and white creatures do look a little tiny bit weaker than I'm used to seeing, but I think that's not a big deal because the theme is just so well supported. And the other thing to look out for is how much repeatable targeting are you going to put in versus how many combat tricks. You don't want to dilute your game plan too much. You don't want to be sitting around tapping your creatures or putting equipment on things when you could just be attacking and casting combat tricks. So just be aware that there is the potential to dilute your game plan a little bit here. White-green rabbits is our next archetype. Go wide tokens is the name of the game here. We want to just generate as many creatures as we can and benefit from a wide board state. The uncommon is Beauregard Mentor, green-white. For a rabbit with trample, its power and toughness are equal to the number of creatures you control. The common is Head of the Homestead, 3 green-white hybrid for a 3/2 rabbit. When it enters, you get 2 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens. So 3 bodies for 5 mana at common. This is an excellent card. And the rare is Phineas Ace Archer, green-white for a 2/2 rabbit with vigilance and reach. When it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control that's a token or a rabbit. And if creatures you control have total power 10 or greater, you draw a card. So this is probably going to die in combat, but if it distributes 3 or 4 +1/+1 counters and draws you a card, you're totally fine with that. Some premium cards for this deck are Hop to It, 2 and a white sorcery, make 3 rabbits, and Harvest Right Host, which we just looked at, 3 mana, 3/3. When it or a rabbit enters, target creature gets +1/+0, and you draw a card the second time that happens. Just awesome, and these are awesome together, of course. So Hop to It's like a B+. You're going to be first picking that card a lot of the time. Harvest Right Host, probably more of like a C+. You're going to be looking to pick this up when you know that you're in the rabbit's deck. We're also going to be looking for cards that benefit from tokens being in place, since we're going to be creating all these tokens. Stuff like Seasoned Warren Guard, single white for a 1/2 rabbit. When it attacks while you control a token, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Druid of the Spade, 2 and a green for a 2/3, and if you control a token, it gets +2/+0 and has trample. And Hazard Root Herbalist, 2 and a green for a 1/4 rabbit. When you attack, target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. If it's a token, it also gains Death Touch until end of turn. So all C-level cards, but really good in this deck. We're also going to be looking for ways to pump our team of rabbit tokens. We got 2 nice ones here at common. We've got Warren Elder, 1 and a white for a 2/2 rabbit. You can pay 3 and a white to give creatures you control +1/+1 until end of turn. You can do that multiple times if you have enough mana. And the big one here, the heavy hitter, Rabbit Response, 2 white for an instant. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control a rabbit, you scry 2. This will be the big game ender for this deck. And then another card that just synergizes with having a bunch of tokens is Tree Guard Duo, 3 and a green for a 3/4 frog rabbit. When it enters, target creature gains vigilance and gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Some additional ways to generate tokens, multiple creatures, are the offspring creatures. So Flowerfoot Swordmaster, 1 mana, 1/2 with offspring 2 that pumps your mice. The Intrepid Rabbit, 3 mana, 3/2 with offspring 1 that pumps other creatures. And Bushy Bodyguard, it's 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/1 with offspring 2. When it enters, you may forage. If you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So you may have a little bit of food stuff going on in this deck, which makes the Bodyguard a little bit better as well. So white-green, not one of the very top archetypes, but definitely a solid one. You'll be happy to pivot into this in the draft if you're trying to be white-red, but red isn't happening. Move into white-green. It'll do well for you. Pros, it has a good amount of support. It's got 2 nice mass pump effects at common that we saw. And Head of the Homestead is a B-level common. This is the best of the hybrid mana commons, and hopefully you'll get a lot of these. If you're drafting white-green, hopefully the other drafters won't poach them from you too much. In terms of cons, making a lot of creature tokens is not a trivial thing. A lot of those good offspring creatures are going to be picked highly for other people's decks, and really you've only got Head of the Homestead as the card that you're hoping to pick up a bunch of that can make multiple creatures. Hop to It, of course, is the very best one, but that's going to be a first pick for a lot of people as well. And the deck is weak to flyers for sure, and weak to big creatures. So you're going to need removal or combat tricks to get through the big creatures, and you're going to need to be faster than your opponents with creatures with flying. And you're going to need to be able to outrace the decks with a lot of flying creatures. Next is blue-black rats. The theme is Threshold. Threshold means having 7 or more cards in your graveyard. The uncommon is Tidecaller Mentor. This is 1 blue-black for a 3/3 rat wizard with menace. And if you have 7 or more cards in your graveyard, when it enters the battlefield, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. The common is Mind Drill Assailant, 2 blue-black hybrid for a 2/5 rat with Threshold. As long as 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, it gets +3/+0, and it has the ability to blue-black hybrid to surveil 1. So this archetype is a little bit dissonant with itself in the sense that on one hand, it wants to be a tempo aggro deck with a 3-mana 3/3 menace that can bounce things, and on the other hand, it wants to be a long game deck that waits until it has Threshold and then its creatures get big and scary. So it remains to be seen if this deck is going to be powerful. Well, let's have a look at it. The rare is actually quite nice. Vren the Relentless is 2 blue-black for a 3/4 rat with Ward 2. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And at the beginning of each end step, you create X 1/1 black rat creature tokens that pump each other up for each rat you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents control that were exiled this turn. So essentially, while this is in play, whenever your opponent's stuff dies, you get rats, and they all grow each other. And it's really good against the blue-green deck that's trying to exile their creatures on purpose. Some of the key cards for this archetype are going to be Mind Whisker, 2 and a blue for a 3/2 rat that lets you surveil 1 every turn, and if you have Threshold, your opponent's creatures get -1/-0. Shoreline Looter, 1 and a blue for a 1/1 rat that can't be blocked. When it deals combat damage to a player, if you have Threshold, you draw a card. If you don't have Threshold, you draw and discard. So kind of good either way, but obviously better when you have Threshold. Persistent Marsh Stalker is your rat payoff, 1 and a black for a 3/1 rat that gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. And if you have Threshold, whenever you attack with 1 or more rats, you can pay 2 and a black and return Persistent Marsh Stalker to the battlefield tapped and attacking. So again, just kind of weird. These are all pretty aggressive, slanted cards. And are we trying to kill them, or are we trying to get to Threshold? And what effects do we have to enable Threshold? Well, let's have a look. They're not great. We got Daggerfang Duo, 2 and a black for a 3/2 rat with Death Touch. When it enters, you may mill 2 cards. So that's not bad, but it's still a long way from 7. Stargaze and Dire Sight. These are ones that we looked at a little bit ago. Stargaze is X black for a sorcery. You look at twice X cards from the top of your library. You put X cards from among them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard, and you lose X life. So if you're casting this as X equals 2, you're getting 2 cards in your graveyard plus this, which is 3, which is pretty good, but the life loss is going to hurt you. And Dire Sight, similar thing here, 2 and a black for a sorcery that surveils 2, draws 2 cards, and you lose 2 life. This deck does not really have any obvious inherent ways to mitigate this life loss, so you don't want to do too much of this, but these will help fill your graveyard if that's what you're trying to do. In terms of cards that you're happy to get into your graveyard, Bonebind Orator, 1 and a black for a 2/2 Squirrel Warlock Bard, and if it's in your graveyard, you can pay 3 and a black and exile it to return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So if you're filling up your graveyard and you get a really sweet creature in there and you get this in there, then you got a little bit of value from that. Of course, that reduces your Threshold count, though, which is a little bit awkward. Hazel's Nocturne is 3 and a black for an instant. You return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. So filling up your graveyard, Get some nice creatures back, get a little bit of life back. This seems pretty good in this deck. And Husk Burster Swarm is 7 and a black for a 6/6 menace death touch that costs 1 less to cast for each creature you own in exile and in your graveyard. So nice graveyard payoff there. Ruthless Negotiation is single black for a sorcery. Target opponent exiles a card from their hand, and if this was cast from a graveyard, you draw a card, and it's got flashback for 4 and a black, so you can cast it from your graveyard. So another card that you're happy to just loot away or mill away, no problem. And then we've got a couple of cards that are sort of supposed to be your early plays, I think, to defend, and then they get better later on. Thought Shucker is 1 and a blue for a 1/3 rat. When you have Threshold, you can pay 1 and a blue to put a counter on it, a +1/+1 counter on it, and draw a card. You can only do this once. Night Whirl Hermit, 2 and a blue for... And Night Whirl Hermit is 2 and a blue for a 1/4 rat with Vigilance. If you have Threshold, it's got +1/+0 and can't be blocked. These are both like C-. Not looking to take these early, but they seem to fit in the deck. And then these cards are all sort of B-ish level cards that will do really well in this deck, but also are probably going to get poached into other decks. Wix Patrol is 4 black for a 5/3 rat. When it enters, you mill 3 cards. When you do, target creature and opponent controls gets -X till end of turn, where X is the greatest mana value of cards in your graveyard. Daring Wave Rider is 4 blue for a 4/4 Otter. When it enters, you may cast an instant or sorcery mana value 4 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. So if you're heavy on removal spells, this will be a great way to buy those back. And Eddie Merc Crab is 5 blue for a 5/5 crab with flash. Costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard. So again, all those removal spells going to come in handy here. It enters tapped if it's not your turn, and when it enters, you tap up to 2 target creatures. So these are all going to be really nice ones for this deck, and you should definitely try to play these. So blue-black, if you can't tell, I'm pretty down on it. I think it's probably one of the worst decks in the format. But it does have the pro of blue tending to be an underdrafted color in general in Limited, as it's more complex and has a less obvious game plan. So if you can figure out the secret sauce to make this deck work, you're going to benefit from the fact that other players around the table will not be taking the blue cards as high as they maybe should be. But there are a lot of cons here. Black is going to be an overdrafted color, as it usually is, especially in this set because it's got so many good removal spells. So many people are going to start with a Fel or a Nocturnal Hunger or a Feed the Cycle and get into black, and you're going to have a hard time getting enough removal to make this deck work. It's also got the dissonant theme of tempo aggro versus long game self-mill that kind of fight against each other. I'm not sure which one you're supposed to be in. And it also has inherent friction with the forage mechanic, where you're trying to exile cards from your graveyard for benefits and certain black cards, but you want to keep cards in your graveyard to hit threshold. So I think overall this deck is not going to be one that you're trying to draft. I would avoid it, especially early in the format. Next is Blue-Red Otters. The theme is non-creature spells. Our uncommon is Stormcatch Mentor. This is blue-red for a 1/1 Otter with haste and prowess, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And it says instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So it's going to make our spells cheaper. It's going to grow when we cast our spells. It's going to deal some damage to the opponent. Pretty good. And Tempest Anglers are common. 1 blue-red hybrid for a 2/2 Otter. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Our rare, which I would actually caution against drafting, is Alania Divergent Storm. 3 blue-red for a 3/5. When you cast a spell, you can copy it if you let your opponent draw a card. Just kind of bad and not a great stat line. I would actually avoid this rare in general. One of the key payoffs for this deck here is Coruscation Mage. This is 1 and a red for a 2/2 Otter with Offspring 2. It says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. And if you pay the Offspring, you'll be dealing 2 damage. So this is really powerful alongside a deck full of non-creature spells. Similarly, some sort of C-level cards here. Harnesser of Storms, 2 and a red for a 1/4. When you cast a non-creature spell, you can exile the top card of your library and play it until end of turn. And Kindlespark Duo, 2 and a red for a 1/3. It can tap to do damage to your opponent. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it untaps. So kind of a bunch of just nice effects here that benefit from casting spells. So we'll be looking for cheap spells, and we'll be looking for spells that generate creatures, such as Otter Ball Antics, 1 and a blue for a sorcery that makes a 1/1 blue and red otter creature token with prowess. And if you flash it back for 3 and a blue, that creature gets a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's going to trigger your spell stuff and give you more creatures that trigger from your spells. So it's exactly what this deck wants to be doing. Probably not a super early pick, but C+ level. If you know you're in blue-red, you certainly want this card. We also like spells that draw cards. Pearl of Wisdom, 2 and a blue for a sorcery, costs 1 less to cast. If you have an otter, you draw 2 cards. Playful Shove, 1 and a red for a sorcery, deals 1 damage to any target, and you draw a card. Just excellent stuff for a blue-red spells deck. You're hoping to have a lot of good removal in a deck like this, and any deck with good removal wants to draw cards, so Mind Spiral will play a role here. This is 4 and a blue for a sorcery. You can gift a tapped fish, and you draw 3 cards, and if the gift was promised, you tap a creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. Eddie Mercrab, which we already looked at, in a deck with a ton of spells. 5 blue for a 5/5 flash, costs 1 less for each instant and sorcery. Taps creatures when it comes in, really good. And Light Shell Duo, just a solid role player in the deck. 3 blue for a 3/4 with prowess when it enters Surveil 2. More cheap spells and spells that draw cards. Into the Flood Maw, single blue for an instant. Returns a creature an opponent controls to their hand. Sazakap's Brew, 1 and a red for an instant. Discard a card, draw 2 cards. If you give them a fish, you can give a creature you control +2/+0. And Might of the Meek, single red, creature gains trample, and draw a card. So blue-red, not a deck I'm super excited about. I think it's a bit better than blue-black, but not a place you really want to be. But the pro of the deck is if it's super open, if you get a lot of Coruscation Mages, the thing that pings your opponent when you cast a spell, if you get a few of the Signpost Uncommon, you're going to be pretty happy with this deck. It should work pretty well. The cons is that it really wants a lot of red removal. You want a lot of the 1 and a red, deal 3 damage, and everybody's going to be taking that card, so it's going to make that difficult for you. It also has the A+B problem of drawing only spells or only payoffs or the wrong thing at the wrong time. And just in general, there's not a lot of cheap removal in the set, and you really need a lot of that in a deck like this. So I would probably stay away from blue-red. Next is blue-green. This is a deck I would not stay away from. I would really like to draft this one. This looks really fun. It's frogs, and the theme is bouncing and blinking your creatures. The uncommon is Lily Splash Mentor. This is 2 green-blue for a 4/4 frog with reach. And you can pay 1 green-blue to exile another target creature you control and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. This is known as blinking, and it comes back with a +1/+1 counter on it. You can do this only as a sorcery. So what do you want to blink? Well, you want to blink things with really good enter the battlefield abilities like Pond Prophet, our Signpost Commons. Green-blue hybrid for a 1/1 frog. When it enters, draw a card. So I think you can see what's going on here. We also have 2, count them, 2 really nice rares in this archetype. Clement the Worrywart is 1 green-blue for a 3/3 frog with vigilance. When it or another creature you control enters, return up to 1 target creature you control with lesser mana value to its owner's hand, and it lets frogs you control tap for green or blue mana to cast only creature spells. So this thing can actually kind of go crazy. You can tap all your creatures, generate a bunch of mana, play something, bounce them into your hand, play that, bounce something else to your hand, play that, and get all these enter the battlefield effects. We also have Dream Dew Entrancer, another premium one here, 2 green-blue for 3/4 with reach. When it enters, tap up to 1 target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you control that creature, draw 2 cards. So you got your choice of locking down an opponent's creature for 3 turns, or tapping this thing to tap itself and draw 2 cards, or tap another creature you control, draw 2 cards. Maybe you blink that creature, it comes back. Lots of shenanigans here. Both of these cards I think are pretty high picks and are definite pulls into this deck. Some other key cards here. Long River Lurker, 2 and a blue for a 2/3 frog with ward 1. Gives your other frogs ward 1. When it enters, target creature you control can't be blocked this turn, and then when that creature deals combat damage, you can blink it. So it's kind of doing everything. It's pushing damage, it's protecting your important stuff, and it's blinking stuff. So just kind of everything you want. I think this is a pretty high pick and definitely really good in this deck. 3 Tree Scribe is 1 and a green for a 2/3 frog, and when it or another creature you control leaves the battlefield without dying, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So basically, if you return something to your hand or blink something, you get a +1/+1 counter. Stack those +1/+1 counters on something you're not going to blink, because once you blink it, you lose all those counters. And Polywallop is a really, really nice payoff for this deck as well. This is 3 and a green for an instant. Costs 1 less for each frog you control. It says target creature you control deals damage equal to twice its power to target creature you don't control. So if you've got 3 frogs in play, this is a 1 mana instant speed removal spell that no other deck is going to want to draft. You should get 2 or 3 of these if you're the only frog drafter at the table. It's a really, really nice reward for being in this deck. Some other ways to blink and bounce your stuff. Splash Portal is a single blue for a sorcery. You blink a creature you control. If it's a bird, frog, otter, or rat, you also get to draw a card. Sticky Tongue Sentinel, 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 3/3 frog with reach. When it enters, you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. And Sky Skipper Duo is 4 and a blue for a 3/3 flying that blinks something when it enters. Stuff with good enters the battlefield abilities that we want to be blinking here. Bellowing Crier, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 frog. When it enters, draw a card, then discard a card. Splash Lasher, the premium blue card, is 3 and a blue for the 3/3 with Offspring, 1 and a blue. When it enters, tap and stun a creature. And Sun Shower Druid, single green for a 0/2 frog. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and gain a life. So just C-level cards here, aside from the Splash Slasher, which is a B-level card. Some other nice enters effects from Hive Spy and Wolverine. This is the 5 mana 5/4, where you can choose one of 3 different excellent enters the battlefield abilities. Baker's Bane Duo, the 2 mana 2/2 that makes a food. And Curious Forager is a 3 mana 3/2, 2 and a green for a 3/2. When it enters, you may forage, and when you do, return target permanent from your graveyard to your hand. This is really good with Baker's Bane Duo, as you can get a bunch of foods by blinking the Duo, and then return things back from your graveyard by blinking the Forager. Runaway Together is a nice trick for this deck. It's another card that's probably like a C or even like a D in the draft, but should perform pretty well in this deck. So 1 and a blue for an instant. Choose 2 target creatures controlled by different players. Return them to their owner's hand. So you get to bounce one of your opponent's things, disrupt what they're doing, and get something back of your own for value. And finally, this card's a bit of a stretch here. I'm not sure. I should probably be recommending not to draft it, but I'm going to put it here. Stocking the Pantry, single green for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, this gets a supply counter, and you can pay 2 mana and remove a supply counter from it to draw cards. It's a lot of mana, it's a lot of setup, but if you're blinking a bunch and putting a bunch of 1/1 counters on stuff, this will give you some extra card advantage as well. Blue-green frogs, I think it's a premium archetype. I think you should be drafting it. I think it looks really fun, looks really strong. The pros are that Polywallop is a great removal spell, and no other drafter is going to want it. This is the highest over-the-top power ceiling. This is doing the most powerful thing you can do in the format, I'm pretty sure. And given enough time, this deck will win any game. So the cons are, can you survive the aggro assault of your opponent? If your opponent's playing red-white, do you have enough defensive speed? Do you have enough early defense to not die to aggro? Or are you wheel spinning too much for not enough effect? So just be aware that you need to have actual good payoffs. You need to have the payoffs that tap and stun your opponent's creatures and affect what they're doing. And you need to have the Polywallops to remove their threats. And also worth noting that you can't blink at instant speed in this format. It's all sorcery speed, which makes it worse because you can't sit back and block and then save your creature from combat by blinking it. So it hurts the defensive prospects of this archetype. But all in all, I think this is really good and really well supported. Our next archetype is Black-Red Lizards. All of its cards get better when your opponent loses life. I love it when my opponent loses life, so I'm going to like this deck. Fireglass Mentor is black-red for a 2/1 lizard at uncommon. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So not the best body as a 2-mana 2/1, but can get in there early and later in the game can get you some card advantage. Cindering Cutthroat is the common. This is 2 and a black-red hybrid for a 3/2 lizard. It enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if an opponent lost life this turn, and you can pay 1 and a black-red hybrid to give it menace until end of turn. So just a nice aggressive creature. The rare is quite excellent. This is Gev Scaled Scorch, black-red for a 3/2 lizard with ward, pay 2 life. It says other creatures you control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. Whenever you cast a lizard, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. So that lizard will enter with a +1/+1 counter. Just everything you want for this deck. Some of the key cards for this archetype. Of course, the mythic uncommon of the sets, Thoughtstalker Warlock. 3 mana 2/2 makes them discard, or you get to Thoughtseize them if they lost life. It's also got Menace, because why not? Flamecash Gecko, 1 red for the 2/2, and it enters if they lost life. You add a black and a red, and it can filter your hand later in the game. And Scales of Shale, 2 and a black for an instant, costs 1 less for each lizard you control. Target creature gets +2/+0 and gains lifelink and indestructible. So this should be a 1 mana trick most of the time that the other drafters will not want. It allows you to attack with impunity and get in for that damage so you can trigger your other creatures. Some other nice ways to enable your opponent losing life. Ravine Raider, single black for a 1/1 with Menace, and you can pay 1 and a black to give it +1/+1, so it's even good in the late game. Agate Blade Assassin is 1 and a black for a 1/3 lizard. When it attacks, defending player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And Steampath Charger is 1 and a red for a 2/1 with Offspring 2. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to target player. So all these cards are making sure that your opponent loses life. And except for the Ravine Raider, I guess they could double block it, but the other two, even if they die, your opponent still loses life, you still get that trigger. A medium payoff for the deck, more like a C- here, is Frilled Spark Shooter, 3 and a red for a 3/3 Menace Reach. It enters with a +1/+1 counter if they lost life. And a couple ways to trigger the life loss that are not ideal, but you might end up running them. Kindle Spark Duo, 2 and a red for the 1/3, can tap, deal damage to the opponent. And Sinister Monolith, 3 and a black for the black artifact. At the beginning of combat on your turn, they lose a life, you gain a life, and you can sack it to draw cards. Black-red, I think another premium archetype, maybe not the very best in the set, but right up there. The pros, it's got the best removal suite. Black's got great removal, and red's got pretty good removal, and you get them both together. That's real nice. And aggro plus chip damage is just a great strategy in general. So you're already being asked to do something that's good to begin with. It's nice. The cons of this deck, there's not a ton of good payoffs for them losing life, and the creatures are generally a little bit understated, so just look out for that, but I do think this is going to be like a tier 1.5 archetype in the format. Black-green Squirrels is next. They're all about foraging, which is sacrificing a food or exiling 3 cards from your graveyard. The uncommon is Vine Reap Mentor. Black-green for a 3/2 squirrel. When it enters or dies, you get a food. Tons of value. You're going to need a lot of food in this deck. This card is exactly what you want. Corpseberry Cultivator is the common 1 black-green hybrid for a 2/3 squirrel. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may forage, and whenever you forage, put a +1/+1 counter on Corpseberry Cultivator. Probably won't want to be foraging just for the sake of it, but when you have other cards that want you to forage for benefit, this thing is growing, and that is very nice. Camellia the Seed Miser is the rare. It's a really powerful one here. 1 black-green for a 3/3 squirrel with Menace. Gives your other squirrels Menace. Whenever you sacrifice 1 or more foods, you create a 1/1 squirrel token. And you can also pay 2 and forage to put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel you control. So just kind of does it all here in one nice little package for only 3 mana. High pick, powerful card. A nice forage payoff and build around for this deck is Bone Cache Overseer. This is single black for a 1/1 squirrel. You can tap it and pay a life to draw a card if 3 or more cards left your graveyard this turn, or if you sacrificed a food. So probably not a super high pick, but certainly a card you really want once you're in black-green. Couple of premium foragers here. Bushy Bodyguard, 1 and a green for a 2/1 with Offspring 2. It's a squirrel. When it enters, you may forage. If you do, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So if you can forage twice, you can get a 4/3 and a 3/3 for just 4 mana. Really, really good. Curious Forager, this is the 3 mana 3/2 that forages and brings something back from your graveyard. And a C-level forager here is Treetop Sentries, 3 and a green for a 2/4 squirrel with reach. And when it enters, you may forage. If you do, draw a card. Nice. Your squirrel payoff is Honored Dray Leader, 2 and a green for a 1/1 trample. When it enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter for each other squirrel and or food you control. And whenever another squirrel or food enters, it gets another +1/+1 counter. So this is just going to get huge if you have a lot of squirrels. Still probably not a super early pick, but I would take it around C+. And if you're in this deck, it's going to do really well for you. In terms of ways to enable foraging, I think the best of them is Cash Grab. This is a 1 and a green instant. It says mill 4 cards. You may put a permanent from among those milled cards into your hand. If you control a squirrel or returned a squirrel card, in this way you create a food token. So if you've got enough squirrels, I think 8 would be the magic number or more. You're going to get 3 cards, 4 cards into your graveyard, and a food token and a squirrel or something useful in your hand when you play Cash Grab. And it's a common, so I think you're happy to play 2 or 3 of these. It's going to enable a lot of foraging for you. Baker's Bane Duo, another premium forage enabler. This 2-mana 2/2 that makes a food. Heaped Harvest, if you're trying to splash, is a really good one here. 2 and a green for an artifact food. When it enters and when you sacrifice it, you search for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So it's going to provide some nice forage value for you and also help find your splash lands. And finally, Paw Patch Formation. This is not a premium card, but I think if you're in this deck, it's going to do some work for you. 1 and a green for an instant. You can draw a card and make a food, which is exactly what you want to do, or you can destroy a creature with flying or destroy an enchantment. So some nice utility here. We also want to look to fill our graveyard to enable forage. So Stargaze and Dire Sight again come up as not premium cards, but cards that could have a home here. The food, if you can sacrifice it to gain life, will help mitigate the life loss of these. These are the cards that draw you extra cards, put stuff in your graveyard, and you lose life. Hazel's Nocturne, which we already looked at, is going to benefit you if you've filled up your graveyard. It's the 4-mana black instant, return 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, drain them for 2. Peerless Recycling is similar. This is 1 and a green for an instant. You can gift them a card, and you return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If you gave them the gift, you get another card from your graveyard to your hand. Bonebind Orator, this is a 2-mana 2/2. If it's in your graveyard, you can pay 4, exile it, get a creature back. And Husk Burster Swarm is very, very nice in the Squirrels deck. It's the 8-mana 6/6 Menace. Death Touch costs 1 less to cast for each creature you own in exile and in your graveyard. So even if you've exiled them to pay a forage cost, they still count towards the discount on this card, which is really nice. So overall, I think Black-Green's probably like a tier 2 strategy. I think it's pretty strong, and I think you're going to be happy to draft it a good amount of the time. Its pros are it's got a great Signpost Uncommon. Cash Grab is a great enabler, and it's at common, and other decks won't want it, and it does give you the ability to splash. So if you've got some fixing, you can pick up a nice rare that you happen to open that's not in your colors, or maybe you'll get past some good rares later in the draft that other people can't play. You'll be able to splash them in this deck. In terms of cons, it's got a defensive playstyle, and it may not be able to keep up with the aggro decks, so be aware of that. Our final archetype is Red-Green Raccoons. The theme is Expend 4, which just means spending your 4th mana on spells each turn. Seems like something you want to be doing anyways, and this is going to pay you off for it. The uncommon is Wandertail Mentor, red-green for a 2/2 raccoon. When you expend 4, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and it can tap for red or green. So it's going to ramp you into your expensive spells and get bigger as the game goes on. Love it. Junkblade Bruiser is the common. This is 3 red-green hybrid for a 4/5 raccoon with trample. When you expend 4, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. And our rare is Muera Trash Technician, 1 red-green for a 2/4 raccoon. At the beginning of your first main phase, you get a red or green mana for each raccoon you control. So nice little passive ramp here. Whenever you expend 4, you gain 3 life. Little padding against the aggro decks. And whenever you expend 8, exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So once this starts going off, if you ever expend 8, you'll be really popping off, and the next turn you might get to do it again, and then you're really running away with it. So this archetype just benefits from being able to play some really strong cards here. Brambleguard Veteran, 1 green for the 3/4. When you expend 4 raccoons you control, gain +1/+1 in Vigilance. Bark Knuckle Boxers, 1 green for 3/2. When you expend 4, it gets indestructible. Teapot Slinger, 3 and a red for the 3/4. Menace, when you expend 4, deals 2 damage to each opponent. How do you enable expend? Well, you want to be able to ramp. So Brazen Collector, 1 red for a 2/1 with first strike. When it attacks, you get a red mana. Perfect for this deck. Flamecash Gecko, the 2-mana 2/2. If they lost life, when it comes in, you get a black and a red. Helps you, spend your 3rd and 4th mana right there. Those are great ways to get to 4 mana. And once you have 4 mana, what do you want to cast? Well, Alania's Pathmaker is a pretty good 4-drop. This is 3 and a red for a 4/2. When it enters, you exile the top card of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play that card. So not a huge priority in the draft, but I think this is like a good C-level card that this deck's going to want. And then a couple of big hitters here, these B-level cards, Quake, Tusk, Boar, 3 red, for 5/5 with Reach, Trample, and Haste, and Galewind Moves, 4 green for the 6/6, Flash, Vigilance, Reach, and Trample. Raccoons, great deck, tier 1 deck. Pros, expend 4. Doesn't really require any deck building. You just want to be doing this anyways. And the cards that it wants to play have a high power floor to begin with. Unfortunately, these also kind of act as cons, as these cards fit well in most decks, so other drafters will just be taking them. And I'm honestly going to be surprised if I ever get to draft red-green, because all of its cards are so good that they just fit wherever. But maybe in the first couple of days of the format, we'll get to draft some red-green and crush some people. All right, so that wraps up the archetypes. Let's review the pick order one more time. We got the A's, the bomb rares, and the B's, the top uncommons and commons. These are our first, second, third, fourth, maybe if we're lucky, picks. And then from there, we're looking for signpost uncommons that are going to pull us into an archetype, a color pair. So this is going to be our third pick, fourth pick, fifth pick type cards. And our C's follow that. These are our support cards that fit into the deck that we're drafting. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh pick and onward. And our D's are the cards that we will sometimes play, but most of the time are too weak. We didn't really go over any of them in this video, as they're not really all that relevant. And these are the cards you're going to be picking up at the end of the pack. A little bit of draft strategy here. Pack 1, want to stay close to one color if possible, to leave ourselves flexible for different possible decks as the draft goes on. A few off-color cards are okay to have, but we want to try to stay close to that one color if we can, and we want to prioritize cheaper cards where we can. The better our early picks are, the more we want to stick to the color of those picks. So if we got a really good rare early, we want to try and stick to that. We want to try and play that. The worse our early picks are, if we saw a really bad pack, pick 1 and pick 2, then we want to take more chances on other colors and try to find an open archetype and get into a powerful deck. We also want to pay really close attention to picks 9 through 14. These are known as the wheel packs. This means the pack has gone all the way around the table and you're seeing it for the second time. So everybody's had a chance to look at it. Whatever's left in that pack gives you a lot of information about what the other players at the table are not drafting, especially if you were to see like a signpost uncommon, pick 9 or 10. That's a really good indication that nobody is in that color pair, and it might be time for you to move in. In packs 2 and pack 3, we're going to continue to take powerful cards of our main color where possible and let the good cards we open or get past determine our secondary color and final archetype. Pay attention to the pack direction. Sometimes people don't know about this if they've never drafted in person before, but it works the same way on Arena. The pack goes clockwise in pack 1, counterclockwise in pack 2, and clockwise again in pack 3. What this means is whatever you were seeing in pack 1, whatever you were getting past, whatever was on the wheel in pack 1 is likely to be the same in pack 3. So if you can identify that a color or color pair was not really being drafted in pack 1, you may not see it in pack 2 because the pack's going opposite direction. You may see sort of opposite signals, if you will, but in pack 3, you're going to see that same color or color pair getting passed to you again, so you can plan ahead for that. It's a really important part of drafting that you should pay a lot of attention to. All right, let's play a little game here. Where does it belong? As you're drafting, I want you to think about where cards are supposed to go in this set. This set is very, very much geared towards drafting a color pair and a creature type deck. It's very on theme. So what we want to do is we want to take flexible cards early and cards that are more specific to decks a little bit later in the draft. So we're going to look at a few white cards here that are all pretty darn powerful, all pretty close in power level, but I want you to think about where do they belong. So Banishing Light, this is 2 and a white for the enchantment. When it enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. This fits in any white deck, right? White, blue, white, black, white, green, white, red. This is a premium removal spell. Any one of those 4 decks is going to be happy to play 1, 2, maybe even 3 copies of this. So this is a great early pick because it leaves you open to whichever one of those decks you end up getting into based on what cards you get past. A card like Flowerfoot Swordmaster, single white for the 1/2 with Offspring 2. It has Valiant and pumps up your mice. Where does this fit? Well, it fits obviously in red-white. It's the mice deck. I think it also fits pretty well in green-white since it makes multiple bodies, and that's what that deck wants to do. I also think it fits pretty well in white-blue, because that deck is all about targeting your non-flying creatures when flying creatures enter the battlefield, so you're going to get the Valiant trigger off of this. Not as good as red-white and green-white, but definitely fits there. But white-black has no interest in this card. It's not a bat. It doesn't gain life, doesn't lose you life, doesn't do anything for that deck. So this only fits in 3 decks as opposed to 4 in Banishing Light. So I would say if you saw both of these in the first pack together, you might take Banishing Light. Even though Flowerfoot Swordmaster is probably a little bit more powerful, it's not quite as flexible. Harvest Right Host, if you remember this one, is 2 and a white for 3/3 rabbit. When it or another rabbit enters, target creature you control gets +1/+0, and you draw a card if it's the second time. This doesn't fit at all in blue-white, doesn't fit at all in black-white, fits really well in green-white, because that's all about rabbits, and fits okay in red-white if you have some rabbit support because of the targeting for Valiant. So this really only goes in 2 decks. Even if it's pretty close in power level to the last 2 cards we saw, it's much less flexible, so you should not take it early in the draft. And then finally, kind of an obvious one here, but Seaglaive Mentor, 1 red-white for the 3/2, Mouse Soldier, Vigilance Haste, Valiant gets +1/+1 counter. This really only goes in red-white. You can't really cast it anywhere else. You wouldn't really want to splash it because it's not an expensive bomb. So if you take this first pick, you're kind of locking yourself into red-white, and if red-white isn't open at the table, then you're going to be having a tough time. All right, on to some deck building tips here. We want to play 2 colors. We want to play 17 lands. Really don't want to break from these 2 unless your deck's really designed for it. If you've got a lot of fixing, maybe you can play a 3rd color, just a couple of cards as a splash. And if you have no cards that cost more than 4 mana, you can get away with playing 16 lands. But again, it's really not recommended. And play a low curve. Lots of cheap cards, very few expensive cards. I'll show you kind of what that looks like. This is a mock draft I did on 17 lands. It's a little grainy, the images here, but you can see we've got 5 creatures at 2 mana, which we'd like to have 1 or 2 more if we could, but that's not bad, and a 2 mana removal spell. We've got 6 creatures at 3 mana, including Hop to It, which makes creature tokens. And we've got 4 premium removal spells at 3 mana as well. At 4 mana, we've got 2 of the Monolith that are sort of build-arounds for the white-black deck, and I've included Intrepid Rabbit and Dark Star Augur as 4 drops since they have Offspring 1, and you're going to most often want to cast them for 4 mana. In our 5-drop slot, we've got a nice Signpost Uncommons, Starseed Mentor, a filler 5-drop creature, and a bomb mythic rare. So we kind of got lucky with some rares in this one, but just to give you an idea of what the curve should look like, and all the cards in the deck are pointing in the same direction. They're all working towards the life change on your turn theme of black-white bats. All right, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you want to support the channel, please click like, leave a comment, click subscribe. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Leave your feedback, your questions, say hello. It all helps support the channel and grow the channel. You can also send me an email at howtodraftmtg@gmail.com if you have any questions or you want to inquire about private coaching. Until next time, good luck in your drafts. Bye for now.